The girl who returned his lost journal and found herself inside. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain hammered against the glass walls of the Cole Tower like 1,000 restless hands. Inside the top-floor boardroom, the air was colder than the storm outside. Adrian Cole sat at the head of the long marble table, his jaw set, eyes locked on a stack of news headlines flashing across the big screen. Adrian Cole's fiancée returns from the dead, one headline blared. Another, Cole Foundation's tragic love story revived. Every word was a dagger. Across from him, his PR manager stammered, "Sir, we can control this narrative if you confirm the engagement was real. Investors are already asking questions." Adrian's voice cut through the room, calm but edged with steel. "It was never real. She is gone. And I will not use the dead to sell hope." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. He stood, closing the leather-bound journal on the table, his private sketchbook, filled with pages no one had seen. "This," he said quietly, "is the only truth I ever wrote." He turned away from their nervous faces and walked out, the storm swallowing him whole. Downstairs, in the narrow streets of downtown Manhattan, Mira Hayes hurried along the sidewalk, clutching her umbrella against the wind. Her shoes were soaked, her cheap jacket no match for the cold. She worked nights at a small photo studio, scanning old prints for clients who never remembered her name. Tonight, she just wanted to get home before the last subway left. That was when she saw Ida black leather journal half submerged in a puddle near the crosswalk. The initials A.C. were pressed in gold on the cover. She glanced around. No one. The rain pounded harder. She hesitated, then crouched to pick it up. The pages were damp, the ink bleeding slightly, but what caught her breath was the drawing on the open page, a quick charcoal sketch of a woman holding an umbrella at the very same corner she was standing on. It was her. Mira blinked in disbelief, flipping to the next page, another sketch, her again, from the photo studio window where she worked. "What is this?" she whispered. Inside the back cover was a hotel key card. She read the name. Cole Tower, Suite 77. For a moment, she thought of leaving it there. This was New York. Lost things were not meant to be returned. But something about the journal, about that drawing, tugged at her. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was foolishness. Either way, she found herself walking toward the glowing skyscraper that rose above the city like a lighthouse. When she reached the marble lobby, drenched and shivering, the receptionist blinked in surprise. "Miss, can I help you?" Mira lifted the journal. "Someone dropped this. I think it belongs to Mr. Cole." The woman hesitated, then pressed a button. "Wait here, please." Minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and he stepped out, the man from the headlines, taller in person, his expression unreadable, eyes sharp as the rain outside. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. Adrian Cole looked at the drenched stranger holding his journal and said quietly, "You found something that should not exist in anyone else's hands." Mira swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was on the street. I just thought you might want it back." He studied her, then nodded slowly, something flickering behind his calm facade. "Come with me," he said. "There is something we need to discuss." And in that moment, Mira Hayes had no idea that returning a stranger's lost journal would draw her into a contract marriage that would blur every line between truth and pretense and change her life forever. Adrian Cole led Mira through a quiet hallway that smelled faintly of rain and expensive leather. The elevator ride up was silent except for the soft hum of machinery. She held the journal tight against her chest, the edges still damp. When the doors opened, he gestured toward a private conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's stormlit skyline. "Please, sit," he said. His voice was calm, but something about it made her heart race. Mira sat at the edge of a leather chair, unsure if she should speak. Adrian remained standing, his hands in his pockets, studying her as if she were a puzzle. "You work at the photo studio on 9th Avenue, he said finally. She blinked. "How did you know that?" He nodded toward the journal. "It was in there. A receipt. You scanned old prints for me last month." Mira felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "You remember that?" "I remember precision," he said. "You handled a fragile photo that no one else could restore." His tone softened slightly. "You are good at what you do." The compliment caught her off guard. "Thank you," she murmured. He motioned to the journal. "May I?" She handed it to him carefully. He opened it, flipping through pages filled with sketches, notes, and lines of poetry written in dark blue ink. Mira could not help but glance at one page where her own face appeared again, sketched in careful strokes. "Why did you draw me?" she asked quietly. Adrian's eyes did not leave the page. "Because you looked real. Most people in this city wear masks. You looked like someone who still believed in tomorrow." She had no idea what to say to that. The room fell into a long, soft silence broken only by the rain tapping against the glass. Finally, he closed the journal and set it down. "Miss Hayes," he began, "I owe you for returning this. But I also need your help." Her brows furrowed. "Help? With what?" Adrian exhaled slowly, choosing his words with care. "You have seen the headlines. My company is under scrutiny after the accident that took my former fiancé. Investors are nervous. The board is demanding stability, a public image of recovery. They need to believe I am moving forward." Mira stared, confused. "I do not understand what that has to do with me." He looked directly at her. "I want you to pretend to be my fiancé, just for a few months. Until the media cycle ends." Mira laughed softly, thinking it was a joke. When he did not smile, the sound died in her throat. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. "Completely," he replied. "You will be compensated more than fairly. Enough to pay off your mother's hospital bills, your rent, and anything else you need. It is a business arrangement, nothing more." She stood, shaking her head. "That is insane. You do not even know me." Adrian's gaze remained steady. "I know honesty when I see it, and I need someone who will not lie for attention or money." "And you think pretending to marry you is honesty?" she shot back. For the first time, he smiled faintly. "Sometimes pretending is the only way to show people what they want to believe." Mira looked at the city lights glittering below them, each one like a tiny promise she could not trust. Her mind spun. The offer was outrageous. Immoral. Yet his words about her mother pierced through every argument. "Why me?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Adrian studied her face, his expression unreadable. "Because when you returned that journal, you did not open it to steal or to pry. You opened it to protect something that was not yours. That tells me everything I need to know." She could feel the weight of his gaze, the quiet authority in his tone. It scared her. But it also made her wonder what kind of man lived behind that calm exterior. She turned toward the window, watching the rain blur the world outside. "And if I say no?" she asked. "Then you will walk away," he said simply. "But if you say yes, you will change your life tonight." Myra's chest tightened. The image of her mother's weak smile flashed through her mind, the unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen counter. She closed her eyes, hearing the rain against the glass, steady and relentless, like the ticking of a clock. Finally, she whispered, "If I agree, what happens next?" Adrian stepped closer, his voice barely above the storm. "Then tomorrow morning, the world will meet my fiancé." He extended his hand. For a long moment, she hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached out and shook it. The contract had not yet been written, but the deal had already begun. The next morning began with a knock on Myra's apartment door. When she opened it, two assistants in gray suits stood outside holding garment bags and a thin leather folder. One of them smiled politely. "Good morning, Miss Hayes. Mr. Cole asked us to deliver your wardrobe and the contract for your review." Myra blinked in disbelief. She had barely slept, the weight of last night's conversation still pressing on her chest. "Contract?" she repeated. The man nodded. "Mr. Cole prefers things to be written clearly." He handed her the folder and stepped back. Inside were 10 neatly typed pages bearing the header Cole Foundation. Her name was printed in bold next to his. She sat on the edge of her small couch, heart pounding as she read. Clause 1 duration 3 months, with public appearances at 5 official events. Clause 2 no physical intimacy without consent. Clause 3 maintain discretion about the arrangement. Clause 4 compensation a transfer of $150,000 to her account upon completion. Clause 5 the journal of Mr. Cole must remain confidential. She froze at that last line. It felt strange to see it written like a rule. But the money, the promise of security for her mother, made the words blur. She signed at the bottom before she could change her mind. When the assistants returned an hour later, they escorted her to a sleek black car waiting outside. The ride to Cole Tower was silent except for the hum of the engine. When the elevator doors opened, Adrian was already waiting, dressed in a dark suit, tie perfectly knotted. He looked at her for a long moment before saying, "You read everything?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Then you understand what this is." "A contract," she replied. "A performance." He nodded once. "Exactly." He turned to the stylist who followed behind them. "Let us begin." The next hours passed like a blur. She was measured for gowns, taught how to walk in heels that felt like balancing on glass, and shown photographs of events she would attend. Every detail of her life was suddenly scheduled: speech training, etiquette briefings, and a full media rehearsal. Myra caught her reflection in one of the mirrors and almost did not recognize herself. The girl from the photo studio was gone. In her place stood someone elegant, polished, and exhausted. Adrian watched from a distance, expression unreadable. During a short break, he approached her, holding a cup of coffee. "You should eat," he said. "You will need energy for tonight." "What is tonight?" "Your first appearance." She nearly choked. "Tonight? I thought this was just preparation." He glanced at his watch. "There is a board gala at 7. You will attend as my fiancé, consider it your debut." Myra stared at him, panic flashing across her face. "I cannot do that. I will make a fool of myself." "You will not," he said simply. "Just remember to stay close to me and smile when I look at you." His tone was calm, but there was a quiet assurance in it that disarmed her. As the sun set, the car carried them to the Grand Astoria Hotel, where the gala was already buzzing with reporters and flashing cameras. Myra's hands trembled as she stepped out of the car, her gown shimmering under the lights. The crowd surged forward, shouting questions. Adrian's hand found hers, steady and firm. "Breathe," he whispered. They walked through the lobby like a scene from a movie, his composure absolute, her heart a thunderstorm. Inside, chandeliers cast golden light across marble floors. At the center of the ballroom, a journalist approached. "Mr. Cole, is it true the rumors are false? Is this the woman who helped you recover?" Adrian's grip on her hand tightened slightly. He smiled for the cameras. "This is Myra Hayes," he said smoothly. "My fiancé." The room fell into a hush, the statement rippling through the crowd like electricity. Flashbulbs burst, capturing her stunned face beside his calm one. She forced a polite smile, her mind spinning. Later, when the noise faded and the last reporter left, Myra found herself alone on the balcony, the city stretched out below like a sea of stars. Adrian joined her, his voice low. "You did well tonight. She turned to him, her tone half disbelief, half relief. Did I? He nodded once. Better than most people who have trained their entire lives for this. The compliment made her chest tighten unexpectedly. This feels unreal, she whispered. It is, he said. But that is the point. She looked up at him, the rain starting to fall again in soft drops. And when the contract ends, she asked. Adrian's eyes met hers. Then we go back to who we were before. But something in his tone suggested that even he did not believe that. The following week unfolded like a movie Mira never auditioned for. Every morning began with fittings, interviews, and rehearsals for upcoming appearances. Adrian's assistant, Clara, handed her color-coded schedules that dictated everything from her breakfast time to the length of her smiles. The world believed she was the mysterious fiancé who had helped Adrian Cole find his heart again, and tabloids devoured every photo, every gesture. Yet behind the glamour, Mira felt trapped in a performance that paid well but cost her peace. One afternoon, she sat across from Adrian in his penthouse living room, sunlight reflecting off the glass wall. He was reviewing contracts while she practiced table etiquette for their next event. The silence stretched until she blurted out, "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" He looked up, expression unreadable. "Pretending is what keeps the world in balance, Miss Hayes." "You mean lying," she said. His lips curved faintly. "In business, those two are often the same." She sighed, setting down her fork. Maybe that is why people do not trust the rich. They forget how to be real. For a moment, his gaze softened, and something almost human flickered there. But then he stood and adjusted his cufflinks. "You should rest before dinner. We leave at 6. That night's dinner was a private gathering with key investors at an art gallery overlooking the river. Mira wore a deep emerald gown, elegant but understated, as Adrian had requested. As they entered, conversations paused. Cameras clicked. A gray-haired man approached with a grin. "Adrian, you certainly know how to surprise us. This young lady is far more charming than the papers suggested." Mira smiled politely, repeating the script Clara had drilled into her. "It is a pleasure to meet you. Adrian speaks so highly of your work." The man laughed. "He does not speak highly of anyone. You must be special." Adrian's hand rested lightly on her back, steady and protective, and for a brief second, she forgot it was part of the act. Later, as they walked through the gallery, she stopped before a painting in abstract swirl of blues and silver. "It feels cold," she murmured. "Like loneliness wearing a crown." Adrian's brow lifted. "You see stories in everything." "Because everything tells one," she said. "Even people who pretend not to." Their eyes met for a beat too long before a voice interrupted them. "Mr. Cole." A reporter had slipped past security. "Is it true your engagement ring is the same one from your previous relationship?" The question sliced through the air. Mira froze as every face turned toward them. Adrian's jaw tightened. He could have dismissed it, but instead he reached for her hand, his voice calm but deliberate. "No," he said. "This ring is new, because this woman is not a replacement. She is my future." The crowd murmured approval. Cameras flashed again. Mira felt her pulse in her throat. He had said the words so convincingly that even she wanted to believe them. Hours later, back in the car, the city lights blurred past as neither of them spoke. Finally, Mira broke the silence. "You did not have to say that." "I did," Adrian replied. "It was necessary." "For the cameras?" she asked. He glanced at her. "For us." She turned toward the window, uncertain if she had misheard him. The line between performance and reality was starting to dissolve, and that terrified her more than the lie itself. When they arrived at his building, she stepped out first, the wind catching her hair. Adrian followed, holding the door open. "Good night, Miss Hayes," he said softly. "You can call me Mira," she replied without looking back. We are supposed to be engaged, after all. He paused, then smiled faintly. Good night, Mira. As she rode the elevator to her floor, her reflection stared back from the mirrored walls, a stranger in designer silk who looked nothing like the woman who had picked up a wet journal from the street. She pressed her hand over her chest, feeling her heart race, and whispered, "What have I gotten myself into?" Meanwhile, in his penthouse above, Adrian stood by the window, the city glowing beneath him. He opened the black leather journal and turned to a blank page. In blue ink, he wrote a single line, "Sometimes, the lie becomes the only truth that feels real." Then he closed the book, unaware that the story he was writing would soon turn against every rule he had ever made. By the second month, Mira had learned how to move through high society without tripping over her own nerves. Every smile, every word, every gesture was practiced. Yet she still felt like an outsider in a world built on crystal glass and whispered power. Adrian, on the other hand, seemed untouchable, his composure precise, his charm mechanical. But beneath that surface, something about him had begun to change. Late one afternoon, Mira arrived at Cole Tower for a scheduled photo shoot for a charity campaign. The rooftop garden had been transformed into a scene of elegance, with cameras, lighting, and assistants bustling around. She spotted Adrian speaking with the head of the foundation, his posture commanding as always. When his eyes found hers, however, the edges of his seriousness softened. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and for the first time, it did not sound rehearsed. Mira laughed lightly, trying to deflect. "You pay people to make me look like this." "Still," he said, "they did not create what the camera will see." The photographer called for them to stand closer, to hold hands, to look at each other as if they were in love. At first, Mira followed directions mechanically, but then Adrian's thumb brushed against her hand, grounding her. The photographer snapped the photo right at that moment. Their eyes locked, something unspoken between them. Later that evening, after the crew had packed up, Mira stayed behind in the quiet garden. The city stretched below in a sea of light, and for once, she felt peaceful. Adrian joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You did well today," he said. She smiled faintly. "You always say that." "Because it is true," he replied. They stood side by side in silence. Finally, she asked, "Why do you do it?" "Do what?" "Hide behind all this," she said, gesturing at the glass towers, the suits, the image. He looked out at the skyline for a long time before answering. "When my father died, I inherited more than money. I inherited people's expectations. They do not care who I am, only that I do not break." His tone carried no anger, only exhaustion. Myra's voice softened. "Then maybe you need to learn how to break. Sometimes that is the only way to rebuild." Adrian turned to her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You make it sound simple." "It is not," she said. "But it is worth it." For a long moment, they stood there under the soft hum of city life, the distance between them shrinking not because of pretense but because of quiet understanding. The next evening, the two attended a board gala hosted at the Carter Museum. It was a crowded room of investors, journalists, and polished socialites. Mira stayed close to Adrian as instructed, smiling through small talk and champagne toasts. Things were going smoothly until one of the board members, a woman in red, leaned forward with a sharp smile. "Mr. Cole, rumor has it your engagement is a publicity stunt. Is there a date for the wedding, or should we just keep watching the headlines?" The crowd tensed. Myra's stomach dropped. Before she could react, Adrian lifted his glass and said calmly, "You may save the date for winter. The details will be announced soon." Laughter rippled through the table, but Myra's heart raced. As soon as they stepped outside, she turned to him. "A winter wedding? What was that?" "Damage control," he said smoothly. They needed reassurance. "You could have warned me." "It was spontaneous," he replied. "And effective." "You cannot keep using me like this," she said quietly. Adrian's voice softened. "You are not being used, Mira. You are helping me hold everything together." And what about me? She asked. Who is holding me together? He looked at her, the mask slipping for the briefest second. Maybe I am trying. The words hit her harder than they should have. The car ride home was silent except for the rain against the windows. That night, she stood in her apartment, staring at her reflection again. She looked every bit the fiancée of a billionaire, yet her heart felt heavy. Meanwhile, Adrian sat alone in his study, replaying her words. For the first time in years, he closed his laptop before midnight and opened his journal instead. He wrote, "She reminds me of the person I used to be before everything became performance." Then he placed the pen down, unsure if he was writing about business, or about her. The days that followed carried an uneasy calm, the kind that comes before a storm. Mira and Adrian continued their public appearances, but the rhythm between them had changed. There was a softness now, an awareness that neither of them wanted to name. During photo sessions, his gaze lingered a moment too long. During car rides, silence became less awkward, almost comfortable. Yet, despite that fragile closeness, a quiet tension lingered beneath every word they shared. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Adrian invited Mira to dinner in his penthouse rather than another public restaurant. "You deserve one night without cameras," he said simply. When she arrived, the table was set with understated elegance. There were no servants, no photographers, no noise, only the soft sound of piano music playing from the other room. "You cooked this?" she asked, smiling. "Do not look so shocked," he said, removing his jacket. "I am not completely useless outside a boardroom." Mira laughed softly. "I was expecting 10 waiters and a menu I could not pronounce." "I thought you might prefer something normal," he said, pouring wine. The meal was simple: pasta, salad, and laughter that came easier than it ever had before. When the conversation quieted, Adrian leaned back, studying her. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were reckless." "Reckless?" she repeated, pretending to be offended. "You returned something you should not have touched. Most people would have sold it or thrown it away. You brought it back." "That was not reckless," she said. "That was decent." "Exactly," he said softly. "And that is rare." Myra's gaze dropped to her glass. "You think too little of people." "I think too much of illusions," he corrected. "You have been the only real thing in my life for a long time." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. For a heartbeat, she forgot every clause in their contract, every rule about distance. Then, as if waking from a dream, she stood and walked to the balcony, needing air. "This is not supposed to feel real," she whispered. Adrian followed her, standing beside her beneath the cold night sky. "Maybe it does not have to be supposed," he said quietly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, something too sincere to be performance. The sound of rain began again, light and rhythmic, as if the city itself held its breath. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch hesitant but warm. Mira did not move away. "Adrian," she said softly, "we cannot." "Why?" "Because when this ends, it will break us both." He looked at her, his eyes full of something deeper than charm. "Then maybe we do not let it end." She turned away, tears stinging her eyes. "You do not mean that." "I mean every word," he said. "You think this is still pretend, but it stopped being that a long time ago." The doorbell suddenly rang, cutting through the moment. Adrian frowned and went to answer it. A young assistant stood there, holding a stack of newspapers. "Sir, you should see this." Adrian unfolded the top copy, his expression tightening. The front page headline read, "Cole's fiancé a fraud? Anonymous source claims she was paid to play lover." Myra's blood went cold. "What is that?" she asked. Adrian's jaw clenched. "Someone leaked our contract." Cameras flashed outside the window as reporters gathered below the building. The calm night shattered in an instant. Adrian grabbed his phone, calling his security team, while Mira stood frozen, her heart hammering. They will destroy you, she whispered. No, he said, his voice steady, they will try, but I will not let them. He turned to her. You need to stay here until this is over. And what about you? She asked. I will handle it. He brushed a hand against her arm, a rare gesture of comfort. I made this mess. I will fix it. As he left, the elevator doors closed with a soft chime, leaving Mira alone in the silence of his empty apartment. She looked at the newspaper again, her image printed under the cruel headline. For the first time, she was not sure who she was anymore, the girl who returned a journal, or the woman accused of selling her soul. She pressed her palm against the cold glass of the window, watching the lights of the city blur through her tears. Outside, thunder rolled over Manhattan, echoing like the truth neither of them could escape. By morning, the storm outside had calmed, but inside Adrian's world, the chaos was only beginning. News networks replayed the story on every channel, dissecting every smile, every photograph of him and Mira. Words like fraud, deception, and betrayal filled the screens. Mira had not slept. She sat on the edge of the couch, clutching her phone, afraid to look at it. Dozens of messages blinked across the screen, some cruel, some curious. Her name had become a spectacle. When Adrian returned, his face was pale but composed. He set down his phone and met her eyes. I can contain this, he said. My lawyers are issuing statements. The board has called an emergency meeting. And what about me? She asked quietly. They are calling me a con artist. That will pass, he said, but even his voice lacked conviction. She shook her head, her voice trembling. You told me this was business, Adrian. You promised it would stay controlled. Now I cannot even walk outside without being filmed. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I will fix it. I just need time. Time? She repeated bitterly. You have all the time in the world. Mine is running out. She grabbed her coat and headed for the door, but his voice stopped her. Mira, please. She turned, tears glinting in her eyes. Do you know what hurts most? I trusted you. I believed you saw me for who I was, not for what I could hide behind. Adrian took a step forward, his expression raw. I did. I still do. Then why did you not tell them the truth? She demanded. Why did you not say it was your idea, your contract? His silence was answer enough. The look on his face told her that pride still stood taller than love. That is what I thought, she whispered. You can protect your empire, Adrian. I am done protecting your image. She left without another word. The elevator doors closed, and the sound echoed like an ending. Hours later, in the boardroom, Adrian faced the men who had once worshipped his success. This scandal is eroding shareholder confidence, one of them said. You need to distance yourself from her immediately. Adrian's jaw tightened. She is not the problem. The public thinks otherwise, another replied. If you want to save your position, you will cut her off and issue a statement denying any personal involvement. The weight of their words pressed down like iron. Adrian looked out the window, rain still streaking the glass. For years, he had built his name on control, on perfection. Now, the truth was simple and brutal, had lost control because he had fallen in love. Prepare the statement, he said at last, his voice hollow. But as he walked out of the room, the words tasted like betrayal. That night, Mira sat alone in her small apartment, scrolling through the headlines one last time. The official statement had been released. Mr. Cole denies any romantic relationship with Miss Hayes. She stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then she closed her phone, her hands shaking. It was over. Somewhere high above the city, in a penthouse filled with silence, Adrian opened his journal again. For the first time, he did not write about business or success. He wrote only one sentence. I protected everything except the one person who made me real. 2 weeks passed. The headlines began to fade, but the damage remained. Mira returned to her old job at the photo studio, keeping her head down as she scanned dusty film reels and edited other people's memories. The paycheck was small, but at least it was honest. Every night, when the studio lights dimmed, she caught herself glancing toward the skyline where Cole Tower stood like a ghost of another life. She had tried to hate him, but anger could not drown what had once felt real. Meanwhile, Adrian's world was beginning to collapse under the weight of silence. The board forced him to step back from several public roles. His foundation's donors withdrew support. In meetings, his voice no longer carried authority, it carried fatigue. Late one evening, Clara, his assistant, entered his office. "You cannot keep doing this," she said softly. "You need to tell the truth." Adrian looked up, his eyes hollow. "And what truth is that?" "That you loved her," Clara said simply. "Everyone already knows it. You just refuse to admit it." Her words echoed long after she left. That night, Adrian sat alone in the dark, staring at the leather journal on his desk. He opened it to the first sketch of Mira, the one drawn before she ever knew his name. Beneath it, he began to write, "The world believes lies more easily than sincerity. So I will show them what truth looks like." The next morning, social media buzzed with unexpected news. The Cole Foundation announced a new public exhibition at the Grand Astoria Gallery titled The Art of Honesty. Curious reporters arrived to see what Adrian had planned. Mira heard about it on her way to work but ignored it until her phone vibrated with a message from Clara, "You should come. It is about you." Her heart pounded. That evening, she stood outside the gallery, uncertain. Inside, the lights were warm, and people murmured in wonder. On the walls were framed sketches and photographs from Adrian's journal, moments of their story captured in ink and memory. At the center stood a display case holding the original black journal and a small card that read, "She was never a lie." Myra's throat tightened. Then, from the small stage, Adrian's voice filled the room. "I built a company on image," he said, "but I built my heart on illusion. I heard someone who reminded me that truth is not weakness, it is freedom." His eyes found hers in the crowd. "Her name is Mira Hayes. She is the reason this exhibition exists, and the reason I am standing here without fear." The crowd murmured as cameras flashed. Adrian stepped down from the stage and approached her slowly, the noise of the room fading around them. "I am sorry," he said, his voice breaking for the first time. "I let pride silence me when I should have fought for you." Myra's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Why now, Adrian? Why do this?" "Because this time," he said, "it is not business. It is the truth." He reached into his pocket and held out the blue pen she had once seen him use. "The contract is gone, but I still have one promise left to sign if you let me." She looked at the pen, then at him, the world spinning softly around them. "You cannot fix the past with ink," she whispered. "No," he said. "But maybe we can write what comes next together." The gallery had gone quiet, the crowd parting just enough to leave Adrian and Mira standing in the center of the room. The air felt thick with the weight of everything left unsaid. Adrian held her gaze, waiting for the verdict he knew he deserved. Myra's eyes searched his face, not for excuses, but for sincerity, and for once, she found it there. Slowly, she took the pen from his hand, turning it over between her fingers. "You really put all of this together?" she asked. "Every sketch, every word, every truth I was too afraid to say," he answered. "Then why do I still feel like you are trying to convince the world instead of me?" Adrian stepped closer. "Because losing you taught me that love is not something you protect behind glass. It is something you fight for in public, even if it means admitting you were wrong." She looked down at the pen again, the same blue ink that had filled his journal, the same ink that had once drawn her face when she was just a stranger. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was the hospital receipt she had once hidden in his journal months ago. She placed it in his palm. "This is the only contract I ever cared about," she said softly. "You kept your promise. My mother is safe. You do not owe me anything else. He shook his head. I do. I owe you the truth. I do not want a contract. I want a chance. For a long moment, she said nothing. The noise of the room faded until all she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat. Then, finally, she smiled the first real smile in months. If we start again, it has to be real this time. Real, he repeated. No secrets. No lies. She nodded. Then write that down. Make it your last journal entry. Adrian smiled faintly, pulling a small notebook from his jacket pocket. He opened to the first blank page and wrote in clean blue ink, "Real begins today." Then he signed it and handed the pen to her. Your turn. She hesitated, then wrote her name beneath his. The crowd, watching from a respectful distance, began to applaud softly, but neither of them looked away from each other. Later that night, as the city lights shimmered across the river, Mira stood beside Adrian on the same balcony where their story had nearly fallen apart. The wind tugged gently at her hair, carrying the scent of rain. So what happens now? She asked. Adrian looked out at the skyline, then back at her. Now, we stop pretending, he said. We build something worth believing in. She smiled, leaning into him. Not a company, not an image. No, he said. A life. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same blue pen, now out of ink. Guess we will need a new one. She laughed quietly. Or maybe we do not. Maybe the story writes itself from here. As the city hummed below, he wrapped his arm around her, and for the first time, there were no cameras, no contracts, no lies, just two people who had finally chosen truth. The last page of his journal would later read, "The girl who returned my lost words became the woman who helped me find myself." And somewhere in the quiet of the night, the rain began again, not as a storm, but as a promise.